Okay, good to be back with you again, Raimy, here in the Raimy and Bini podcast. Good feedback so far, which I really appreciate, and not just from immediate family, which makes it, I don't know if you want to call it more legitimate than otherwise, but I feel like it's nicer when you don't have them over a barrel in some way. So when people reach out on their own volition. So yeah, I wanted to dive in on our win of the week or our good of the week, let's say, to start. Just feel like that actually was a good additional feature to have a little bit of a feature section like that. And since you started last time, I'll start this time. My person, I'm going to go person again this week, is someone we both know, Jeremy Hazelwood. I don't know if you were going in the same direction as I was, but Jeremy's somebody I met actually through my work at Cosmatch. When I started at the company in coaching, I didn't know a lot formally about online digital fundraising in that way. And Jeremy had a book out that his first book was about online digital fundraising, which, I took home the first day and I read. And then one of the great things about the modern era is you can reach a lot of these people pretty quickly through a LinkedIn connection or their website. And sometimes they even respond. So they don't always respond, but I'm surprised still by how many people, reply to a message on a platform like that, or reply to an email that you send them on their website. So I reached out to him through LinkedIn. I told him, "Hey, I'm reading your book, sort of in the same field now. Can we get on a call?" And we immediately, like within a few days, did a WhatsApp call. We've done multiple calls over the years. I've sent him project ideas. He sent me project ideas, things I'm working on, things he's working on. And it's been a really good collaboration, even though I don't think we've necessarily worked on anything together yet formally, but just a different perspective from someone who lives in a different part of the world, who's in the same general field. And if you guys don't know Jeremy Hazelwood, like, you got to get to know that guy. His second book is terrific. He has a podcast that he launched that I'm happy to promote here called The Jeremy Hazelwood Show, no surprise. And he had this great last episode that closed out season 1, which was basically him rapping about season 1, which is great. He has like this whole history in hip hop and music and super interesting. Anyway, and he's probably a great guest to have on at some point. So I don't have any of that in me as a person, but, he does like 3-4 minutes as a summary for the season through rhyme and a beat about all the episodes that he did and all the people that he had on. I'm in the middle of one now on monthly giving, because someone I'm working with is interested in developing a monthly giving program. And as much as I know about it, which is some, there's a lot more to learn, and there are a lot of experts out there. And so I'm in the middle of an episode of his on that. And yeah, so he's my guy of the week. My winner of the week is Jeremy Hazelwood.
I love it. That's a good one. Had the pleasure of working with Jeremy as well. And the thing about Jeremy, I did not know that he had a background in hip hop. And it does surprise me a little bit, but it doesn't surprise me that he is just a man of multiple talents, because I was having an issue a couple months ago, maybe a year ago at this point, with Google Ads. Something I was trying to do wasn't working, and I posted on LinkedIn looking for someone who could help me navigate that. And Jeremy was like, "Yeah, I can do that," and he helped me through it. And it was just like something in his toolbox I didn't even know existed. But the more I've worked with him, the more that I've seen he's just a talented guy on multiple levels. So very, very
Yeah,
good winner of the week.
thank you. Your turn.
Okay, so I had a feeling that you and I were not going to pick the same person this week, because I'm going in a totally different direction here. My winner of the week is Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, because this guy he does not quit. He does not quit, and I've, as much as I want to throw something at the TV, I've come to respect it in a weird way. He's out there running the ball, doing the same thing week after week, even when it doesn't work, even when the defense is just prepared for it and so good. Some people call it stubbornness. Some people just straight up call it insane. I've come to just say, you know what? I admire the commitment, Arthur Smith. Good for you. Good for having that goal, sticking to it, and not letting anything get you down. It's like that guy at the gym that just shoots threes. You see him shooting threes, none of them go in, but he's just shooting threes all the time. It's like, you respect the grinds at some point. You just like respect the grinds of trying to get that ball to go in the hoop, or in Arthur Smith's case, trying to run it up the gut for the 20th time all game.
I wonder if Steeler Nation is going to be behind you on this. I can appreciate that you're trying to nuance into the specifics of it, But that would be like me doing the same thing for anyone on the coaching staff of the New York Jets at this point, and trying to find like the one thing that, if there's one thing, and there isn't, but if there was one thing, they were bad when they had a head coach and they got worse after they fired their head coach. I can appreciate the grind of the players who, some guys on the team who played 18 weeks and legit played hard 18 weeks, 17 weeks, whatever, however many games they play these days. But kudos to you, because I'm not sure, A, the players on the team would agree with you, the hierarchy of the team would agree with you, your children would agree with you on that one. But finding that needle in the haystack on the positivity of Arthur Smith, who rumor is interviewing for the Jets job, may he not get it. So go there. Congratulations. And
just trying to find some silver lining. That's all
I'm saying. Like, if I'm going to go Pittsburgh Steelers or Pittsburgh sports, like, there's a lot of guys ahead of Arthur Smith,
He's my weekly winner.
Your rookie of the year on the baseball side.
Arthur Smith, baby.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I thought maybe you were going to say like he has a foundation that he does like a quarterbacks camp and it's for underprivileged children and he brings them in and he tutors them and he gives them scholarships. Maybe he does that. And if he does, then there's something here. Otherwise, man, oh man. Okay. I'm just going to cut that section from the show and put it on Twitter. And I'm going to tag every Steeler connected person I can find, when they go, who are they playing this weekend?
Baltimore. Exactly.
You might have to switch teams. I'm just saying after
exactly.
This. If you're going to go, maybe go a Harbaugh on that, like kind of a thing, like that Jim Harbaugh line. I love my brother, but I'll never let him win a football game, kind of a thing. Killer line. Anyway, so I went Jeremy Hayeswood, who, by the way, just to make it full, he has a connection to football, which is worth mentioning. Was a D1 wide receiver for 4 years. I'm not sure what he's doing now, but he was initially with one of the teams in the NFL, at least last year, maybe. But okay, appreciate the grind.
I try not to bring that up with Jeremy because we'll schedule like an hour meeting to like talk about Google Ads, and if we start talking football, then it'll like 45 minutes will pass by. Okay, we have 15 minutes to solve the problem that we actually got on the call to solve. So.
Yeah, no, I got it. I'm the same way on certain things. I hear that. I totally hear that. But okay, good start. Arthur Smith and Jeremy Hazelwood are our good of the week for completely different reasons, which is also part of the reason why we do it. Okay. But now that you've opened the door to like that whole other array of possibilities and people, I appreciate that. And so, we'll go there. Okay. At some point in the future. Okay. So I wanted to dive back into the topic that we started on in the previous episode, which is now what? Now that, the new year has started, the last year is over. And we talked a lot about the Virtuous Cycle Ask Thank report in our last conversation, which I think was really good and really insightful. And we touched on the flip side of it, if it didn't go well and whatever. I want to maybe get back to that too. But first, on the other side of it, and I think this goes both ways, I'm curious, what else are we doing, or what else are you recommending to people that they should be paying attention to, being mindful of, and doing from an active mode not beyond just the Act Thank Report, but just beyond that, which is key to it? What else are you suggesting, recommending here?
So in reflecting on our conversation last time, there were a couple things that I was thinking about that I wanted to add, especially in a case where the system isn't working in the ideal way, where you didn't have your ideal end of year. One of those, I think, and this is something I love to hear your thoughts on because I sort of know the headline and maybe some of the sub-headlines, but it's really in your wheelhouse, is diving into the data and taking a look at, as we're now in January of this new year, to take a look at some of the data and see what the data tells you. And for me, in thinking about that, the very, very first place that you can look, and this works both for organizations that hit your fundraising goals and organizations that did not, is simply look at who gave last year that did not, or who gave, I'd say 2 years ago at this point, let's say 2023, that did not give in 2024. To me, if you just, that doesn't take a data analyst to do. Most CRMs can spit that information out relatively simply. And I think to be able to hold in your hand that list of people that had once given to you not that long ago, but did not give again last year, is a really, it allows you to enter that ask, thank, report cycle again, right? It allows you to make that ask and maybe frame it a little bit differently to say that you were a generous supporter of ours in the past, but you're not on the books for this last year. Can we count on you? Say something in that regard. But it allows you to enter that ask, thank, report cycle again by really simple data, really simple data.
Yeah, you cut out a little bit on the end of that, but I got the gist of what you're talking about. Yeah, to me, and I always used to preach this to everyone. I mean, I still preach this to everybody, but very much preaching that all the money lives inside the data, and your success lives inside the data, both from a financial standpoint and from a programmatic impact standpoint. And really doing the homework and the analysis of like what's actually happening, and not just what's happening, what's working, what's not working, and in relation to what was true last year. As much as you mentioned, I'll bridge between Arthur Smith and now. As much as you want to respect the grind, if you're still, planting seeds in the wintertime at 2 a.m. because that's the grind, and you're not succeeding, you can look at the patterns and see what's going on, what's not going on. So to me, I'm always looking at the metrics to sort of look to understand what worked and what is continuing to work, what's changed, what am I seeing as a trend, what's not yet a trend, but is something that like I'm curious about that's happening inside what I did. And for me, on top of that is making sure that the people that I either respond to, board members and things like that, or even donors, big donors, that I'm able to share that with them as well. One of the things that I used to harp on extensively, still do with when I was fundraising directly, but even now is retention, the retention rate year over year. And even in a year where, let's say, maybe even more so, in a year where we raise less money, which happens, to look at retention as still a key marker for success. So even if we raised less money, if we held on to more donors, but we just happened to raise less money because it was a bad year for whatever reason, to me that was still a win. And admittedly, for a board member, that doesn't sound like a win because in the end, you raise less money. And I'm thinking at like, yes, but we held on to that guy who went to 50% this year because he had a down year in his business, but he didn't go to zero. He went to 50 and he stayed. So from a retention standpoint, he's in, right? This is a metric of success. So I'm always looking at the data to appreciate what, our ebb and flow month over month or year over year in terms of numbers of donors, in terms of turnover, in terms of new, in terms of ups, people increases, people decreases, Y bunts and side bunts, all that other jazz on the fundraising side. And then the programmatic side, how did we do in terms of impact? If it was a school, in terms of the number of students, if it was, alumni programming, how many people attended, how many more events did we do? What was the cost? Were they more cost effective year over year? And those are part of my impact report. To that stuff's going to board members more than it's going to anybody else. But the actual numbers of success and how many cities we hit and things like that, that's going to go to everybody because I want them to appreciate the impact we're having, the people and our reach, the size and scope of our reach. And the analysis for me, I mean, that's where I lived for years. It's just inside the data itself. And what's going on there. When I was at the company, one of the things I used to do is I would ask the leaders of the organizations, what are you seeing in the data, right? I wanted them to elicit and pull out the lessons. Who surprised you? Who surprised you negatively, meaning they were just underwhelmed. If it was a peer-to-peer and there was an ambassador piece to the campaign, a shout out to all the peer-to-peer people, right? Is I would ask, okay, which of your ambassadors, which of the people in that program underperformed? And to what do you attribute that underperformance to? Is that global? Is it particular to the individual? Is it your effort in your outreach to them? Is it in your hierarchy, your communication structure? Like really go deep on it because, and I'm talking too long here, but once you go deep in that, I think a massive amount of lessons come out of it on the other side of that, which make you so much better the next time around and better prepared assuming you want to do that work, better prepared potentially for the next round of it, because it's going to come in some form or fashion. And so I think the analysis beyond ask, thank, report, and maybe this goes into the reporting piece of it, is really going heavy, hard, and deep, at that.
There's a couple things you said there that I really love and sort of want to unpack. One of the things that I Uh, so let me sort of digest that for a second. One of the things that you said right up front is that there are multiple things to look at beyond dollars in. And that even if you're an organization that didn't hit your goals for 2024, there are ways to look at it. And not just to say that you got a win, but there are definitive ways to look at it beyond just dollars in, that you can say, okay, this was a good year. This was actually a good year. Even if we didn't hit that most important metric that we were trying to hit, there are others along the way, and there's a lot to learn from it. So I think that that is great. And then the other thing that I'm just sort of hearing is the different ways that you can look at the data to learn, both different ways that and then you have to do the hard work of asking the questions. What could we have done better? What could we do differently next time around? And the other thing that I would just sort of tack on to that is you can also look at the wins. One place that I've seen gets overlooked when learning lessons is to actually look at the bright spots. When you did have those wins, let's say you didn't hit your dollar goal, but you hit your donors goal, right? Your retention rates were up. Spend some time thinking about asking the question, why? What did we do well? And often when you ask the question of what you did well, as opposed to feedback sessions are so often negative, because that's all of our inclination is when you ask for feedback on something, someone gives you the negative feedback. But there's a lot of value in focusing on the positive feedback as well, where you can just learn what you did right and then mimic that in other situations. So that's I don't know, just a great way
Yeah.
to frame this and a great way to learn from last year.
Yeah. The natural inclination is to go on the negative, right? And we'll always find the things we did wrong faster than the things we did right. And it's easy to sit in there, but it does make for a very unhappy meeting. And I think we're trying to keep everybody curious about it and trying to stay positive, even with just the learnings. Like I do a lot of work with leaders when we just notice things without judging. It's sort of the way the terminology I like to use. It sounds a little fluffy, but it's actually really good. It just wants you to, list out the things, right? What are those things? What were the wins? Don't judge them. Don't disagree with them. Everybody can just have different opinions as to what the wins are. Let's get them all out on the table, and then we can digest, and then we can judge after we have them all listed out. The other thing which you said, which is important to go a little bit further on, is you have multiple goals that you're working on at any given time. And sometimes X is a priority versus Y is a priority. So maybe one year you've decided as an organization, we're going to go to town on growing the size of our donor pool, which means we're going to spend more time on cultivating new donors and finding new audiences. And so if on the end of the net raise at the end of the year was lower because we spent more on the marketing side up front, like, okay, like that. So that's a good metric because you got 100 new donors and it cost you X to get each new donor. And that's a win because your number for the year as a target was 60 and you got 100. Congratulations. That's a victory, even though it costs you what it costs you to get each and every one of those donors. Maybe your goal is retention, is really focusing on, you're not looking at new donors. You're just looking on to hold on to your donors to go from 46% to 65%. And you and I have done the math and you have presented the math to people. Here's what happens if you hold on to 20% more of your donors year over year. That might become your priority. And then that's a win, even though one board member would say, well, our overall number of dollars was down. Yes, we held on to 25% more donors this year, which means over the long term, that's better. So you have to appreciate that that's true and know how to spin that. I always tell like this example. I forget where I heard it. Maybe I even told this to you, but this is an anecdote. There was a soccer team that was playing against a higher level opponent. They beat their opponent 3-0. And the coach was ecstatic that they won 3-0. And then sometime later, he saw the coach of the team that they beat, which was a better team. And he was extolling his own praises and his team's praises for winning 3-0. And the coach was like, you scored more goals, but we actually won. How? He said, because our goal wasn't the number of goals we scored. It was how many touches and how many passes and time of possession and how many fouls we had. We were working on other things in that game, and none of them was the number of goals we scored. And it's like just a frame shift that was really important. I had a coach in high school, a basketball coach in summer camp, who would count the number of passes. That was in our preseason games in the summer. We were just playing against competition. He counted the number of possessions we did 5 passes on. That was his thing. He wanted us to really move the ball, right? 5 passes. So if we didn't get to X number of possessions with 5 passes, that wasn't a win. That possession didn't count as a win possession, right? So that's a completely different metric system that he's operating on, which the team has to buy into, which goes right into that point about analysis and goals and success and wins and losses and learnings, which all go together. And you want to maybe measure them year over year, because that way you have a comparable and you're not just switching metrics every year that work for you to prop you up. And so I think the analysis is not the part anyone likes, except guys like me who sort of live and swim in the data, right? The image I always used to tell people was like, I was like Scrooge McDuck. I wasn't swimming in like my own money. I was swimming in like organizational data all the time, which is a weird place to sort of live. But if you want to appreciate how people succeed and how they grow year over year, is by helping them to really understand what happened and to learn not just what they learned, but to learn what they learned from what they learned, if I can just say that. And if that makes any sense, I hope it does. Yeah, that to me, like beyond Ask, Thank, Report, which I think is super important, and promotion of it, is the deep analysis of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be challenging. I imagine it's very challenging for a lot of organizations to take the long view when it comes to this, right? Because the fact of the matter is there's no preseason in fundraising. We can't say, okay, 2024 was a test year to see how we were going to do X, Y, or Z, because like money needs to come in now because service recipients need help now and the lights need to stay on now. So I think I would just caution or to say that for fundraisers, even though it's super hard to take that long view, fundraising is by definition a long view game. You can't look at it that this campaign didn't do well, therefore X, Y, or Z. It's a much longer view of this, and it's relationship building, and it's understanding what the long term trends are.
Yeah, and it's not the focus of this conversation and some this conversation, but when you talk about like the turnover and the burnout in the industry, right? Like that's like part of it is because, and the reason I'm mentioning it here is because it takes a long time to develop and cultivate those relationships and to become the new person in an organization to get the same gift from the person who gave it last year. Like that doesn't happen overnight. And to cultivate new and to have the trust and to have burnished your credentials in that organization and to be the person that they see, that takes a lot of time. And so if you look at it from the short term, how much did he raise or she raise in a year? And the turnover rate for people in the space is 18 months, like it doesn't, it's a multi-year investment for good or for bad. Obviously, you'll know quickly if it's really not good. But I remember, again, not for this moment, but I've asked board members, at what point do you know it's not going with a certain leader in your organization? And it's like a super interesting conversation as to what are the things that they're picking up on about the person, for better or for worse, in that space. But yes, like it's a long view, and it's how did I do with this group of donors? And it is the rare organizations. There are some organizations that have the ability to either set aside funds year over year to develop some of these things, or can take really strategic, aim at a goal that is atypical as a goal, because they are able to play the long game. Their leadership is really smart and savvy and is thinking 5, 8, 10 years down the line, is looking at how they're funded right now versus how they're funded in the future. And they're going to be smart about it, even though that they know they're going to take some hits and some warts at the moment and some bruising, that the long term, this is going to be what's best for their organization, even if it comes with moaning and groaning and difficulties and problems and struggles and bottlenecks. And from the team, this is where we need to go. That could be on systems, right? That could be on messaging. It could be on the fundraising itself. It's a whole lot of things that they can do, but it is not the norm for an organization, because they're very much, I won't say transactional, but they are very much month to month on it, and they're not able to spend on the long term or even save.
Right, right. The other piece of this that I was thinking about, and this is going in a slightly different direction, but the other thing I was thinking about and trying to answer the question, okay, so what do we do now that we're in the middle of January in 2024 didn't go the way that I planned from a fundraising perspective? The second thing that I was thinking about after diving into the data is to listen, which is really like it can enter the ask, thank, report cycle because it comes after the ask, right? We think of the ask as a donation request, but you can ask any number of questions in that ask. And I think to get in touch with donors, and you can do that on a one-on-one basis. You can do that on a survey basis. You can do mini focus groups or just informal conversations over coffees with multiple people, whatever it is. But I think there's so much there if we just ask the questions and we find the right way to ask donors. What are you passionate about? Why did you cut your gift? Not in a way that to make you feel bad or to ask for the increase, but from a place of what could we be doing better that could be that we could engage more people. And I think that if we ask those questions and then we sit back and we just listen, we listen to those answers. There's so much learning that's going to come from it that's going to prepare us for 2025 and beyond, and we're going to be able to navigate this landscape in a much more secure, safer way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that listening piece, almost like a listening tour, I think is massively valuable because of just the amount of information that you can get and how much you can report back to people. That's true at different levels of at different stages in an organization or your role in an organization. But certainly when things don't go well, you definitely want to be in a space of listening, and certainly not in a space of like blame, putting it elsewhere. Like, okay, this didn't work. We got hit hard this year for whatever reason. You'd like to think that you're going to make it through, to the next, again, to use your football. If some of these coaches can survive some of their years in coaching, then I would like to think that you can survive your bad year in fundraising for the same. Obviously, if you planned it or you put it out there and you were honest upfront about, hey, we're going to be about 10% short this year, and people know that in advance, no one likes that surprise. But definitely connecting and listening, again, not judging and not fighting with donors who didn't give, but 3 weeks into the new year saying to somebody, hey, last year you were a four-figure giver. We reached out a few times. We didn't hear from you. Can we just get on a call or have a coffee? I just want to understand, what shifted for you from last year to this year. Is it on your end? Is it on our end? What can we do differently? And really, and from a place of curiosity and learning, I think actually it pays you back in the long term. Because again, if you look at it as the long term, so he missed a year or she missed a year, okay. But because you did that and you listened to them and they shared hopefully honest feedback with you about where they are and where they're not this year at this moment, when you do come back to them and they are in a space to give, they're going to give you more. They're going to be your ally at a much higher level, and they're going to give you more because, again, you treated them like a human being as opposed to just, a pocketbook and a donation. And I think there's a lot, you have to always keep in mind the humanity of it. You will regain momentum with that donor much more quickly because you have already smoothed that path with them earlier in the process than maybe a lot of other people would. Whereas I think other people might shy away from that conversation, right? And not have it and not know because it's uncomfortable. Like it's uncomfortable on both sides. It's uncomfortable for the donor to explain it, I think, especially if it's personal. If it's just a economic thing, maybe then they're free to say like, I had a down year. In 2008, I was in subprime mortgages. Like my business went to the, garbage. Like I don't have any money for you, right? That's one thing. But if it's more personal, there's something else going on. They have other needs or other things that or they decided not to support you anymore. That's a super uncomfortable conversation, but one that you need to have. And again, if you're looking at it in the long term, the idea that they're not this year, okay, but they're some year down the road because I kept that door open is an enormously valuable thing. It's different than announcing to the world, hey, we missed our goal by 15%. I don't think anybody cares that you missed your goal by 15% out there. But when you talk to the donor one-on-one and you're being honest with them about it, because you have that relationship with them, then I think they do care in the one-on-one.
100%. In the connection between, I heard an amazing quote, which is that the data tells you what, and the conversations, the listening tells you why. So
Yeah,
you're going to
nice.
look into the data,
Love
you're
that.
going to find some sort of observation, or you're going to have some hypothesis, and then you're going to go out into the field and you're going to be able to say to a donor, here's what I'm seeing, is this true? And the other thing that I would say to add on to your point is you can even tell this donor who cut his or her gift, or who cut it all the way or cut it in half, whatever. You can say, like, I'm not going to solicit you on this call. You, like, this is not the point of this, straight up, is not fundraising. This is just for my listening. And what you said, I think my prediction is going to be that 99 times out of 100, if you have that conversation, that person will end up giving without you asking. It might not be tomorrow, but that gift will go back up, because it is all about those relationships. And you're going to, as a fundraiser, you're going to walk away from those conversations with a lot of insights and a lot to think about ways to frame the messaging, about different things that you could do wherever that conversation will go. But you're going to learn about the why, that's for sure.
Yeah, like just take an example from like a real scenario that happened, with take COVID a few years ago, right? No one actually knew what the results of COVID were going to be from a fundraising standpoint, up or down, good or bad. But the leaders that I worked with and talked to, who were coming from spaces of compassion and empathy as it related to their donors, and appreciated the businesses and the markets and the hits that they potentially were going to take, and were really smart about it. Not just smart because they were being strategic, they just were human smart about it. They were just paying attention to where their people are, and did the outreach, and did the conversations, and did the follow up, and just talked to people. When it paid itself back, in spades, because they were genuine and they were real, and they had those hard conversations with people, coming from a good place, and not coming from just a space of, oh, you're a person who gives me a lot of money, or you give me a very small amount of money. No. You're a person. If it's a school, you have children in the school. If it's a community organization, you're a supporter of our organization, your benefit, whatever. And I think that's like, we're always going to come back to the human side of this, no matter where we go in these conversations about tools and technology and data and all that other stuff. It's always going to come back to the human side of it and the relationship side of it, and being really, really smart about that. So I definitely hear that point. I'll add on to that also, just relatedly, is how you talk to your team in the space of, we didn't have a good year, whatever it's going to that means for the organization potentially, and maybe letting people go, whatever that is. And that's a whole other conversation that we can have also. But I think it's important to listen to those people too. And so not just to listen to the donors and the board members, but to listen to the other people on the team, from, office manager to program manager to marketing to accounting, and to really learn from them and be a source of morale and support when it didn't go well. We had a bad campaign. We had a bad year. Our industry got hammered, or the specific area of focus that we work in just got crushed. That can be debilitating and devastating. So listening to those people and being empathetic there and compassionate there and real there, and again, not judging there, I think is another part of when it doesn't go well. One of the things that you can really do is just take care of your team.
I would say, if that sounds overwhelming to people, that's a lot of listening, right? That's a lot of sitting back and asking. We can circle back to what you and I just spoke about, whatever it was, a couple minutes ago, to say you can also have those as positive, easy conversations. If it sounds hard to reach out to a donor who cut his or her gift to ask these hard questions, call a donor who didn't. Call a donor who increased their gift. If it feels hard to talk to an employee who got slammed because their program budget got cut, talk to an employee who had a phenomenal year and ask these same questions. And you can frame it, the framing will be different. It'll be like, this was a hard year for so many people. How were you able to increase your gift this year? Or why do you choose to support us with all the other amazing causes out there? Or if it's an employee, how were you able to stay so optimistic and hopeful over the course of this year? Whatever those questions are going to be, will be case specific. You can, once again, learn a lot from the positive, from the wins, just as much as you can from the losses. And I think that'll help a lot of people ease into the harder conversations that they're going to have.
And you can share it. I think there's a lot of value in sharing some, if they're willing to allow you to use their name on that kind of stuff. If a teammate at your organization in a down year stayed positive, and you're able to glean from them as to how they're able to do that, if it's just their personality or it's more than that in terms of just how they dug into the why of the organization and their passion for the work and whatever, you can share that with everybody else on the team also, which I think it's not sharing a win, but it is sharing a highlight or a positive that people can attach onto when things aren't going great. And I think A, you're boosting the person who you spoke to who shared that with you. B, you're providing as a conduit for everybody else. And C, that other person on the other side of that gets something to help them work through what wasn't a success, a campaign that you ran, which was bad or just didn't raise or didn't sit, it didn't hit with your audience, whatever it is, and you were all over it and thought it was going to be amazing. I think there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that too. So like, I think that's part of that learning is in the listening is, there's a balance. So you're listening on both sides of that, but there's also this other part of it is, can I parlay this in some way into some positive feedback moment to everybody else, which accomplishes a lot of other strategic things for me as a leader in that space at the same time.
Absolutely. Taking that. So you talked about the human element to it. So on the one-on-ones, you're creating that relationship by deepening it, learning more about the person you're speaking to. And then you're taking that information and kind of fulfilling another one of those needs on our pyramid of needs and creating that sense of community, that sense of togetherness. Like we're in this together, whether it's a donor, board member, staff member, whatever it is. But here's a piece of feedback that trickles up to all of us, and we all.
Yeah, because if the teammate feels that they're just a number in terms of how much they raised or didn't raise this year, and they're not a human being. So in a bad year, they're going to be like heading for the hills and freaking out, as opposed to you saying, you know what, we had a bad year, but I loved your positivity this year, even though it was a down year. And I love the energy that you brought to that campaign, even when it wasn't going well. And you still and we all believed it, like we went with it, and you really shared that energy and that positivity even to the end. And even when it was clear we weren't going to hit our goal, you still pushed and you still pressed and you still made those additional phone calls. And like, for them, that you acknowledged the player, right, the person in the role and not just the result, again, like it does with the donor. It pays itself back in spades because they're going to come back for you in a huge way the next time around, I really think. And so that is and admittedly, I'm not great with that stuff. So, the empathy part is not my strength. I wouldn't put that on my list of strengths, to be completely freely honest about things here. And so that was something I had to work on.
Yeah.
And it's something that I would have to write down and remind myself, okay, like you need to be a human being here for a minute before you get into the data side of this, which is where your comfort zone is to be a person for a minute here with the team. And, that ain't easy.
Yeah, no, but that's good because it's real and no one has all of the skill sets, right? No one is that people person and a data cruncher and an amazing fundraiser. Like people are who they are. And I think where you see in yourself those areas that you can use improvements, you can just know that you can improve. This is just a learning experience for us all. We're all getting better at these things.
Yeah, I wanted to share two more ideas here, if I can. I don't know if you were about to say something else, but
no, please go for it.
On sort of now what space. One is celebrating, which I think is not something to take for granted. You set a goal, you hit the goal, celebrate the win, publicly and privately, internally and externally. I think there's a lot of values in celebrating. You should, and if you exceeded your goal, to really celebrate and use it as a spring forward for your next year's worth of success, but really take the time to celebrate, have that opportunity. Again, you worked hard, you played hard, you put the effort in, and it worked. There's something to that for the organization. It's also true for you as the leader, also true for the team to appreciate them in celebrating the victory and celebrating that success. And then there's the external element of it, which is, hey, you supported us and we succeeded in raising the money and therefore we can have this impact. Goes back to what we talked about, ask, thank, report. And you can play that forward and spring forward into your next year's goals. because it's a victory that has legs. What I used to tell people in their campaigns is you can use the success of the campaign to celebrate for an extended period of time after the campaign is over. It's the story you spin that follows after, and that celebration doesn't end the day the campaign is over, the day the year is over, or the next day. You have a few weeks to make that into an article in the newspaper, to make that into a post on social media, to make that into a newsletter. And that just becomes that something that has its own spin cycle around it, which is the strategic part of celebration, right? Celebrating itself is nice and it feels good. That's always true. At the same time, there's this other strategic piece of it, which even if you're not in the mood to celebrate, you might want to celebrate anyway, because it does that other part that's super actionable and valuable, and like don't miss the opportunity to celebrate because you're not in the mood, because of all the benefits that it provides for everybody else, around it. So like, that's the first thing I really wanted to just sort of dive into, is the celebrating. I don't know if you want to add anything there on the celebrating part of it.
Just that I think in a fundraising role, sometimes it gets hard to see the forest from the trees. Mm-hmm. And it gets hard to remember that your organization does amazing work on a day-to-day basis. Often executive directors of development aren't there to see and touch it. They're in the numbers, they're in those one-on-one meetings, they're doing the hard work of raising the money. But there's a lot to celebrate. There's so much to celebrate when your organization's doing amazing things. So I love that suggestion, because it gets easy to think about the day-to-day. And there's a lot of wins happening in all of these organizations every single day. Sometimes they just happen in rooms that you're not in.
Yeah, and you miss them. And when you don't do the celebration and highlight those things, they hurt you, because you forget the work or the impact you're having, and you're just going to day, and the next call, and the next call, and the next call. And that burnout piece, which I mentioned briefly before, this is part of that, is you forget the why of the work and the passion of the work, and you get lost in the what, and the dollars and the cents and the numbers and the widgets and all the other stuff. And you just run out of steam. And so I think that's a piece of it. And relatedly is taking time to breathe, not just celebrate, but also to breathe and to like rest after a good year and a bad year, to take the space to say, okay, I need a minute here to either regain my energy or to find something that fills you back up, that helps you fill back up. Otherwise, you're going to be on empty and on fumes. You're not going to make it. Like, you're just not, it doesn't work. Like, you can't run on fumes all the time and just go like that. You're not at your best. You're not putting out your best work. Your team is suffering because you're not your best. The organization is suffering because you're not at your best, even when you're winning. So taking the time, not just to celebrate, but to just, deep breath in, deep breath out, which I think people think is ridiculous. And admittedly, I used to think that too, because it seems like such a sort of a fluff kind of a thing, but there is a lot to it, and a lot to refilling the tank with the things that you like to do and things that about your work that maybe do it, or not about your work that do it. So I think that's an important part of it, whether you're winning or you're not winning.
Yeah, it's great. It goes back to that long-term view. You just can't. If it's a sprint, then you get tired real fast. And that's just not the way these things work.
Yeah, I want to dive in with one more thing here on the subject with you, because you and I had talked about this during, this is not the moment per se of an economic downturn, let's say, although inflation was a big issue in a lot of places, and there's wars and all this other stuff. But in the space where the year is now starting and you're planning out the next year, and I know we want to talk about fundraising calendar and organizational calendar as a long conversation, but just like a minute here, in the space where it went well your prior year. So talk about like implementing new strategies or new things for the coming year, how you're adjusting your planning for the coming year. And on the flip, if it didn't go well and you have to make a strategic cut, or you have to make a move in your organization, talk about how you would do that, or how you might recommend to somebody, because you're in a different space in January of 2025 than you were in December of 2024, even though you might have thought about it before. Now you actually have to implement. So give me both sides of that.
So I think the second question is a little bit easier for me to answer than the first. And I'll answer it by saying, here's what you shouldn't cut. I don't think that you should cut fundraising. I think that's a really easy, often I've seen people turn to that as a place to cut from because it's not a program or service. And I just caution against that because that is the growth mechanism. If you stunt that, if you make it harder for your organization to grow, then again, you're taking that much shorter window to say, okay, I'm going to cut sort of overhead or back office stuff or fundraising stuff. And that's going to allow me to do the work, which I get that logic and I get that impulse to do, but it's not taking the long view. It doesn't put you in a position to grow later on. I don't have that answer of what should be cut if you're in a situation where things need to be cut, but I would just look long and hard at what the options are and not have that knee-jerk reaction to say, okay, I'm going to cut things that are not actual programs or services that our organization is going to provide.
Are you saying people as opposed to programs, or programs as opposed to people, or it's not as one or the other?
I just would very much view it as a for-profit company. If you have a for-profit company that's looking at cutting expenses, if you're thinking about what's going to put you in the best position to grow moving forward, it's not going to be cutting your sales team. It's not going to be cutting the resources that those sales team have to use. You're going to want that sales team to be strong and even make the argument to beef it up and say, we need more of it. And a lot of the way that I view the nonprofit world is trying to look at it through the lens of the for-profit world. Say what can nonprofit organizations learn from for-profit companies? I think this is one of them. I mean, I think it's as to bring it full circle, it's a focus on retention as opposed to just new donors. It's a focus on building a real machine that allows for growth in the future.
And on the side of when it's good in terms of how you're adjusting the planning, do you want to save that for a different conversation in terms of planning out the year, or can you give me a nugget on that here?
I would just say if you're in a position to invest in the organization's future growth, to really pay attention to what the trends are. And if we're going to focus on the fundraising end here, not programs and services end, then you can take a serious look at what 2025 is going to bring from a philanthropic perspective. We're seeing a huge rise in donor advised funds. So if you have space, this is just an example, if you have space to invest in something, then you might want to look and say, okay, this is a growing trend where more and more donors are setting up donor advised funds and giving through them. That's something that our organization should be doing. And because we had a really successful 2024, we have the ability to do that, even though it's going to take time and resources to set that up and to build a good donor advised fund program or have the integrations that you need for those payments to come in, like whatever logistics are involved in setting that up. You might take a look, just to give another example, could be a monthly giving program. Saying, okay, like we are at a point now where we've had a certain level of success. We can now do the next thing that is really good for fundraising. And that might be really robust, awesome monthly giving program so that we can keep that retention machine moving. Like there's no shortage of ideas of what you could do in fundraising. And I think that just sort of taking a look at the landscape of what the trends are, what are people doing, how are donors acting and responding to it. You're fortunate to be in a position where you're not having to be reactive, but you can actually be proactive and plan for the year ahead.
And on the program side, forget about the fundraising side for a minute, just like in there.
To me, that feels very organization specific. I don't know that there's a blanket piece of advice that I have, but the machine all has to grow at the same time. That's the other thing that I would say is as fundraising dollars come in, you have to build your programs and services up as well. And the other way around, if you're welcoming more service recipients into your organization, then you're going to have to find the fundraising money to service them the right way. It's balance.
Yeah, you're balancing those things at the same time, right? I hear that. I got it. Okay, awesome. I think that covers the subject. Let's hold it there on the subject of now what. And there's more on that we didn't cover, obviously. As I mentioned last time, we're at minute 53 again. If you're into the podcast so far, give us a share and a like. And a subscription that really helps us as we're trying to really build this into something real. It's real, but in terms of growing the audience, if you have suggestions on subjects, on topics, comments, by all means, put them in the comment section below and reach out to us at Raimy and Bini pod@gmail.com, Raimy and Bini pod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, we're open to sponsorships as well. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a great day. Bye, Rick.